out of pure curiosity, do we have our weapons with us? Like, I imagine there would have been something where we would have turned them in at the entrance, but
They didn't have you do it.
okay, cool.
Now's the time. Now's the time. It's coup time, boys. Let's go.
Yep, you can do
This has
it.
all been my con from the very beginning.
Now,
Wait,
one of the base level understandings of even the easiest of Aramean history would tell you that the Empress is at least supposed to be one of the most powerful magic users potentially in the world. And they also expected the Cabal members to be able to help in that defense. So that might be part of the reason why there's not any like defense system. At the very least, for most people, they're not worried about javelins and daggers and now there could be other threats, obviously, magic and so on, but if it's a magical source, they expect the Empress and the Cabal to be able to fend it off. If it's a traditional weapon, they don't anticipate it being a major threat. So that's sort of just the understanding that you have as you're heading in there. But
Okay.
the Empress says, I'm glad to be rid of them. Now you may speak freely. It is still possible that someone could attempt to scry on this room or have some other means of listening in, but I would be able to detect any attempts used on me, and I suspect perhaps even this room. And if someone were to try to listen in, I'm getting to the point where I no longer care anymore.
Well, Your Grace, obviously we appreciate your confidence in us, but I mean, it is very concerning that this is the state of affairs here. Do you truly think that Dryden and his little cabal are this intertwined with your court and your guard?
She gives you kind of a very slow, solemn nod. She says, I do. I have long suspected that whether Dryden was controlling them, or they were just answering to him, or if they were just trying to make him happy in some ill-begotten concept of helping out, that there were several within my court that I could not trust. It's been happening for some time. There would be conversations I might have with visitors or dignitaries in these chambers that details of them would get out through channels I would not expect. Now, all of them always say they have my best interest in mind, and I've never had an issue where I felt threatened in their presence. They have defended me against threats in the past, so I don't think their aim for me is nefarious at its core, but I do think there are several that I cannot trust and would not trust. There are even a couple among the ones I just sent out of here that I think are loyal to the throne, but I would not risk it at this time.
I know pretense can be a thing that's important for nobles, so you seem open, but I want to make sure that I have permission to speak freely.
She gives you a nod. She says, yes, and please be at ease. I tire of the formal conversations I must have, and while I understand the respect given to this position, I do not feel it necessary for this conversation, and you are also right that it is a bit unusual for me to trust outsiders so quickly, but I value Cass's evaluation very highly, and I also have information from another source that leads me to believe that I can trust you, even you, Isaac, despite your lineage. You may be familiar with Cavus Robintero. He's an old friend of mine, and I spoke to him earlier today as well to get an idea of your character, and although he grumbled about a couple of issues in particular, he did vouch for the work you've been doing throughout the country these past few weeks, and if he vouches for you, I would be willing to trust you myself. It's that simple.
Well, with that said, this country is falling apart at the seams. This is not your fault. I don't wish to imply that, but you hold the most power in the nation. What are you doing about all of this conflict? What are you doing about the Whitworth thoroughgoods of the land?
I think what my companion is asking is, how can we best serve the throne in helping restore peace and order in this trying time?
She says, it's difficult to read her, by the way. As you're kind of having this conversation, you're certainly close enough to keep an eye on her at this point. Her expression rarely changes. It looks calm, reserved, but there are times when you have conversations with most folks where, you know, their eyes will tell a story or they'll react to just very certain cues in a conversation. None of that to this point from her.
And with that, I would say to what Tessine said, no, with respect, I meant what I said. Are we being open or not?
She gives you a nod. She says, there are times where I would have someone removed for such insolence, but your question is a fair one. It's interesting that you bring up Whitworth Thorogood. We have actually been investigating him in the last 24 hours because we suspect he's tied to Faust Dryden now. Now, as to your greater point, I do wonder how much power one person truly has. I do not deny that my family and my lineage affords me certain benefits in having an effect on what happens across this land, but I will tell you this, a thing that I have not told many people, but again, people that Cavus can trust, I also will trust implicitly. I have long suspected that my mother did not abruptly fall ill and die. I believe that she was poisoned. And as such, my reign has been something of tiptoeing through potential disaster after another, between the Cabal, who constantly guard me and I do not feel can be trusted, and this threat of someone or something, some force out there that wishes harm upon the throne. I have tried to be very careful not to call too much attention to myself or what I've been trying to work on for the benefit of Aramea. But the events across this country over the last year, 2 years, even further back in some cases, make me think that I can no longer sit idly by. And to be honest with you, I tire of watching people across this continent suffering in some ways or another, when I do have the power to do something about it, even if it comes at my own expense. That's why I gave the green light for this move today. Green light's an Anachroschism, it's fine. Don't worry about that. This is a bold play that we have made today, one that I may not have even considered 6 months ago. But considering what's happening across this country that I love, I feel we have no choice but to take a stand, regardless of my own personal safety, or what else may happen to the throne. A throne that you sit upon that cannot look after its denizens' best interests is no throne at all.
We agree on that point, but I'm relieved to hear that you are so affected by the plight of your people. I didn't know what to think when we came to Waychester for the first time, and I'll be honest, with all the corruption we found so far, I was afraid you were just as involved as and culpable as everyone else we've met.
She says, there are plenty of nobles here who are complicit, or at least naive, who live in Waychester, who plug their ears to the outside world, especially those who live in the Zenith District. Many of them care not for the politics and are only interested in self-preservation. And I suppose, well, I don't think that's an ideal way to live. It's an understandable one. They would prefer to keep what they have and live carefree, and the troubles of the more extreme reaches of this continent do not bother them all that much, especially here where they're so far removed from them. But inside these walls, or at least the very close circle of people that I can trust, Cass and my sister, and Cavus has been here on occasion, and there are some good men among the Cabal, but we are always trying to do what we can, both on the surface and below it, to make life as good as it can be for people here. But I am no stranger to what is happening, especially on the eastern part of the continent. It's part of why Cavus has been so centrally located there the last few months, is that he can be my eyes and ears in a way that I can't. But the stories he has told me, especially more recently, paints a picture of a population that is not being served by its leadership right now. And so this move today is hopefully the first step in changing that. Come what may, I feel it was necessary to promote a future in Aramea that is one that I can sleep at night with.
Well, I just have one more question. Then you mentioned investigating Woodward Thorogood. What can we do to help? I no longer have a list, but if I did, he would be at the top, and there are some things about Thorogood that may be connected to Grail's disappearance. I have multiple reasons to be interested in this.
She says, well, Cavus had the Crusaders looking into him for the better part of today and part of yesterday. From what he told me when I spoke to him earlier, they were able to find out that there was a connection to your group. Apparently you had a run-in with him a couple of weeks ago. As to why he started to make such a bold play with Faust Dryden, we still haven't really been able to find out a ton, but that's partially because he's in the city right now, and the Crusaders were loath to wander the halls of his establishment without calling too much attention on themselves, not to mention they would probably be removed if they tried to. They don't exactly have a lots of power, as it were. In fact, it's amazing the change that they can effect, considering they really don't have any clout behind them other than strong leadership. That said, we will continue to check up on him. You may be able to help with that investigation, but that is a choice that is up to you.
I don't want to speak for the group, but like Tessian said, we're very interested in helping the throne, and especially if it means rooting out this corruption.
Well, I don't mean to change the subject too much, but I feel I must ask, Your Grace, how much do you know of what it is our group has come across in our recent journeys?
Well, I only know what I've been told. Cavus mentioned your group conversing about a couple of issues that you ran into, and I do know this. There is something that feels off about this land. It's a sense that I've had since I was little. I am, without sounding like boasting, I am magically adept, and as such, forgive me, but it's just a strange feeling to describe. It is as though the very ley lines that carry magic throughout the land feel sickly or removed from their correct form in some way. On the times when I've traveled outside the castle, there have been certain locations that just feel as though things are not right. I remember speaking to my mother when I was young, also powerfully adept with magic, and she spoke of having the same feeling ever since the War of Calamity, like something that happened over the course of those events changed something about this country or even the world as a whole in a way that has always been difficult to pin down. But I do wonder if perhaps it is causing instability, effects that should not be happening, occurring in places where they shouldn't be, or more run-of-the-mill effects having a stronger impact than they would have otherwise. I've yet to see anything where magic goes haywire or goes completely out of control, but I do wonder if the amounts of mana expended that day didn't change something fundamentally in this country. Now, as to your points, I would have to experience one of the phenomena more closely to have a better sense of it, but I do wonder if they're not connected.
I will admit, despite me and my family's inclinations, we are not that magically attuned to this land itself. I had no idea that such a feeling existed within the halls of Winchester, but Your Grace, we have reason to believe that there is another world, another material plane, very much aligned next to our own, and that it is possible to traverse between these two planes. Our friend Grail, the one who is no longer present, um, we believe that her family, her grandmother, was pushed from that plane over to here, and that her disappearance is connected to that, perhaps in returning to that plane itself. We have seen phenomenon in Grail's presence. It reacted to her visions into presumably this other place. And if Grail's disappearance is connected to it, then that would imply that Faust and his magic might also be connected to it. I don't know what it is he's doing or why he's doing what he is, but I think that there is a very real danger or threat in this other place, whether it's the place itself or something within it. What little experience we have glimpsing this other world has painted a very grim picture of how things are. It has always been chaotic or under attack. I worry that everything that is going on with Faust is simply a precursor to a much bigger threat looming just behind what we can see. And I feel it is within you and the throne's best interest to be aware of this as soon as possible.
She kind of nods for a second, taking this all in. She says, I think you are onto something. And the fact that Faust was so willing to put himself into custody makes me concerned that what you say is exactly right, that there's more to this than just Faust's workings. And that perhaps we are just on the tip of something much larger, but it will probably not surprise you that in our limited questioning of Faust so far, he has not been forthcoming with a lot of details. There are certain means at our disposal for questioning someone and compelling them to provide truth, but all those options are not at our disposal inside the chamber in which he's being held. It may be something that has to come out over the course of the trial. But even so, and I do not approve of other means of coercing people into providing answers to tough questions, unless the need should arise, but we are still in a time of peace. I do believe that there are threats to this kingdom right now, but at the moment, there is no overarching harm coming to us right now. But I am concerned still. Your point is a valid one. I think, I don't know. My mother always used to mention that before the war, they used to have sightings of these chromatic dragons across the land. The iridescendants, they were called. Supposedly, they were powerful beings that helped watch over the land, but after the war, but before she died, she told me there had been no sightings ever since. I do wonder perhaps if their disappearance is also not tied to the imbalances of magic across this land. It is a difficult thing for me to reconcile, because the War of Calamity was started with the belief that perhaps those with magical lineage were not the ones who were meant to rule. I do believe there is some merit to the monarchy, that we are positioned in such a way that we can provide the most good to people. But in times like this, if magic is going out of control or is somehow going to be the source of future problems for this land, I do sort of wonder if they weren't onto something, perhaps. That said, and she turns to Len at this point.
Okay.
I do think your journey on the Conatus is an important one. We have not seen the completion of a Conatus since the War of Calamity. I'm not even sure there's been one that's been started. I don't know a ton of details about it, but Cavus supposedly has connections and knows at least some things about this journey. But if you and your companions are able to see this through, it would be both useful as a potential source of magic for yourself. It would be informative as to whether the journey can still be completed or if it's been altered in some way. I'm not sure. I suspect it could even be tied to the iridescendants themselves. But your journey might give us a window into what can be done to set things right across this land in a way that I cannot.
I nod and I say, I think you may be right. Before I knew what the Conitas was, or that I was meant to go on this journey, I received a vision, and in the vision was a silver dragon. If that's tied to the iridescence, and maybe part of this journey is bringing them back, we might be onto something there.
I don't know much about the details of the Conatus, as I mentioned, but I do know that it can imbue a successful candidate with powerful magical abilities, and that the tests and the length of the journey all serve as a gatekeeper of sorts to make sure that those abilities don't go into the hands of the wrong people, to make sure that they are those who are well-reasoned and fit to bear them. I do wonder, though, if this isn't going to be a more difficult journey for you, given what's happening right now. So I ask that you continue on it, full well knowing that it puts you in danger to some extent as well. How much remains unclear, but even if the Conatus is unchanged and unaltered by the events unfolding before our eyes, I know there are several people who have not completed it. So I ask that you continue knowing that it is also an imposition of sorts. So I hope you don't mind, but I think it to be important. I really do.
I nod and I say, we value its importance as well and its potential to bring change. And I'm prepared to go on this journey knowing full well all the risks and sacrifices I may have to make. I will do all I can to help this land. And if it means completing this journey, I will do so.
When my grandfather, Carrington, was in power, he once stopped the Conatus before it could start. And I suspect part of the reason for that was he was worried about the abilities that someone who completed the Conatus journey would have at their disposal, that they could be a threat to the throne. From my mother's descriptions, Carrington was a paranoid man, so this does not surprise me, but all of it leads me to believe that this is in our best interests. And I am not concerned about any potential threats. I think the threats that we face right now will be more than enough on their own, independent of whatever it is you and your companions may come across. Even so, I don't know. She kind of looks to Cass at this point as she trails off for the first time, where she seems kind of uncertain. And Cass, who has just been standing there with her sword out in front of her, her hands leaned on top of it, with her weight barely leaning on it. She says, "It is okay, Your Grace. They understand. I think they were going to continue on this journey whether you told them to or not. So I hope I don't speak out of turn, but I think don't feel like you're putting them out, at the very least." She kind of nods. She says, "My apologies. It's just trust has been a difficult and infrequent commodity since I took over the throne. Other than the tightest of my inner circle, there are times where I wonder, when I speak to anyone, if it's going to get out in ways that I do not understand. As a result, even now, when you have placed your trust in me to some extent, and I obviously to you to tell you some of the things that I've told you today. Even so, I am uneasy, and I apologize for that, but I hope you understand that I truly do want what's best for this country, and there may come a point in time where what's best for this country requires me to abdicate the throne. I have thought long and hard about this over the last few years. I'm not saying it's going to happen soon, or maybe even in my span leading this country, but I do wonder at times if perhaps this system that has endured for generations has had so much corruption spread through it throughout the years that it is beyond redemption. So if I seem hesitant in this conversation, that's mostly why I'm not pleased with what is happening here, and I do take most of the blame for it, whether or not I could have stopped it. And that is why I ask for your help as well.
Well, consider us within your service, Your Grace. If everything that you've said is true, if perhaps the chromatic dragons are crucial to bringing peace, well, we ourselves at least have some ties to helping return dragonkind. And Tessian kind of motions to Lena and sort of points to her like, you're a dragon. That's not really what's happening, but yeah. And then he's like, consider us willing to do everything we can. I don't wish to speak out of my place here, but my family has placed a great deal of respect to yours in order to help garner and keep peace. We'll be able to weather any change in leadership here, but I would ask that you fight to keep the throne and the peace that it can provide. I can understand your concern over how bad things have gotten, but I do not think that it is something that you could have fixed. Not without help, which is why we're here.
It's also sort of why I took a leap of faith on this. I mean, again, I had reasons to trust you beyond just my own instincts, and two people that I consider very dear recommended just as much, but this is a much less measured action than most people on the throne would have taken, I believe. I can even only imagine what my mother would have said, but times have changed, and I do intend to fight for this country. I will do everything within my power to set this right, but if that is not enough, should something worse befall it, I do think it will be worth examining our traditions. There are issues with the monarchy that date back to even before my grandfather's time. Some of the people that have led this country have been phenomenal leaders who kept the people's interest at heart, and others have been selfish, leading their own needs first before the people's. I believe the monarchy is the best thing for this country, and I will try to preserve it as best I can. In light of recent events, I think it's shaken me a bit. Perhaps if we can emerge on the other side of this without too much damage, perhaps I'll stop having such hesitance, but your family's connection to the throne is a valid point as well. They have long been supporters, even though our connection is on a overarching level and not a day-to-day one. I do feel as though they have been good for their people in their own way. I don't know. It's all just a mess, I suppose.
Again, I don't mean to speak out of turn, but my family rules the way we do because we understand that we serve our people. If we fail our people, they do have the power to, in some ways, remove us. But if we don't do our job, we don't have a city to rule. There are responsibilities in place, checks and balances. I can understand your fears. Your throne doesn't have the same sort of checks, things to keep you in line, and that can lead some to misuse it. We have seen what that kind of power can do to people, and it's not good. I would never doubt your wisdom, and if you believe that a change in power is necessary, my family and I will support it. I would simply ask that you not underestimate your own ability to enact change. And having someone like you with pure intentions at the top can sometimes make all the difference.
For the first time, you can kind of see her sort of trying to cheer herself up in a way. Like she's kind of like trying to shake this malaise off. And she says, well, you are correct in many respects, and regardless, this is a conversation to have once the more imminent threat to the kingdom has been removed. I should not be indulging myself with my own concerns going forward. Perhaps I'll ask you this then. Is there anything else that you would request of me that you're curious about that I could answer while you are within these halls?
You mentioned ley lines earlier. Do you happen to have access to a map of sorts? We're very interested not only in the Conatus, but in this grander mystery that we found ourselves in. And if your mother's intuition is correct, if the ley lines, the very network of magic in this land has been twisted somehow, that might very well be connected to our journey on the Conatus, or to the grander mystery. I would very much like as much information on that as possible. I am one to trust those sorts of instincts on this sort of thing, and I would like to look into it, if you would allow it.
She says, well, my mother was more in tune with them than I am. I can sense them to some degree, but not quite as strongly as she could. But I will look through some of the possessions of hers I still have and see if at any point during her writings if she had anything as far as a more detailed account of where they might lead underneath this great continent. If I find anything, I'll let you know.
Thank you.
She sort of looks at the rest of the group at this point.
Crash, do you have something to ask?
I do not understand the politics and the mysteries of the magic that Tessian speaks of, but if I can help, I will do so. My purpose in being here on this land is to find my people and hopefully to bring them together again, but I find myself in a position to help, and I will help if I can.
She kind of, for the first time, you get almost a chuckle out of the Empress. She says, those are interesting words. I think Rezia would get along rather well with you. I've tried to keep her separate from the politics as well, because I remember when I was young and things seemed so much more simple before being embroiled in all the political nonsense that can happen in this country sometimes. It's an annoying system, no question. There are people always bidding for more power in some respect. Maybe not even the bigger plays, but sometimes in smaller ones. Anytime a city opens up for rulership, we have people tripping all over themselves, trying to make a play to give themselves more power, more wealth. Some of them mean well, some don't, but I do miss those simpler times, and in many respects, there are times where I wish I wasn't in this position, because I feel like I could be doing more good out in the world, helping people. So I appreciate that gesture. It means more than you might think it does.
Thank you.
Have you received any reports of Dragonborn around, any leads that could help guide our search?
She shakes her head. She says, "No, not especially. I don't often see Dragonborn in Waychester. They unfortunately do not have the financial backing that several of the long-term nobles do in this city. I did meet with several, I don't know, more than a year ago, but that was probably my last contact with them. It has been a while since I have seen one until today."
Were they like me and blue?
She shakes her head. She says, "No, I honestly can't remember the last time I saw a blue Dragonborn. It's been years at the least."
When was the last time you saw one? Or who was the last one you saw?
She thinks about it for a second. She says, "I wish I could remember, but so many people come through these chambers wishing to introduce themselves or making an appearance that I couldn't honestly say. It stuck out as having met them, but the details, this was probably almost a decade ago, if not longer."
That is interesting. Is there a record keeper who might know the name of such a person?
She says, "Well, records on comings and goings are kept at the front desk in the reception hall you probably passed as you came in. I do not know how far back they go, but it could be worth looking into."
I will do that. Thank you.
Just kind of looks over the group again.
Do we
well-
know the location of the next Conatus place now?
I think I've pinpointed it pretty good that it's in Still Valley. Like, I think I have a pretty good idea of where it is. I don't know about, like, coordinates. Like, this is exactly where it is, but I think I have a pretty good idea.
It is south of Still Valley, 30 to 40 miles. So it's a pretty tight location. It's not exact, but when she was going past it, her proximity enabled her to kind of get a much stronger sense of.
Okay.
So she knows it's outside the city from the meditation she was doing that night. It seems to be in the foothills of the mountains to the south.
Will you let us know when we can help with Whitwer Thorogood then? There was some... along with him being a real terrible person, there were some magical ongoings underneath his house in the sewers beneath Falstock. Could be connected to Grail and some of the other things we were discussing. So we would be very interested in helping when that time comes.
She says, "That's a reasonable request. If you wish to be involved in it, I could have Cavis hold off. We're only looking to investigate it further sometime between now and the trial. So it really could be at your leisure in the next 2 weeks as long as it's done beforehand."
Yeah, let's talk. We have some things to decide as a group, but I think that is definitely one thing to consider.
Tessian kind of leans over to Len a little bit. He's like, "It's a group. Do we have a name yet?"
And then I whisper back and I say, I think we agreed on the Order of the Black Opals, yes?
Okay, is that what we agreed on? I don't remember.
It is, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I was actually
Okay,
going to pull
okay.
it up too because I don't 100% remember off the top of my head, but I think it
I
was.
couldn't remember if we officially agreed or decided or like talked about it. Anyway,
Oboe for short.
Yes. Perfect.
that's what we'll sign all of our documents now. Oboe.
Oboe.
Tessian will say, Your Grace, anything else that you could provide us, supplies or any motions to like the ear, is like, these are already go a great way towards assisting us in our journey. Anything else that could help us on the Conatus would be appreciated. But other than that, I believe the Order of the Black Opal has some things to discuss. We need to decide our next course of action, whether that be Thoroughgood or the Conatus. And he kind of turns to the others just to look for confirmation that that's kind of where we're at.
I nod.
She says, very well. Perhaps I could provide a stipend of sorts, something that would aid you on your journeys, considering that you'll be providing some service to the throne, as it were. I'll have Cass set that up. We'll speak on it later, but perhaps I can at least fund a bit of your journey, and that will help in addition to the earrings. I would have you just... Go ahead.
He was just going to nod and say, that would be appreciated.